Hello, good morning, everybody, and welcome. And thank you for joining us today for today's webinar, Driving Member Participation at Scale, Lessons from our Co-op. Membership organisations today are facing a common challenge. How do you create meaningful opportunities for members to participate while maintaining strong, transparent and accessible governance? Whether your membership is local or distributed, large or small, members increasingly expect engagement to be easy, accessible and relevant. In the first part of today's session, we'll explore some of these wider challenges and discuss how organisations are rethinking the way they approach member engagement. We'll then hear directly from our co-op and unpack their recent annual members meeting, which was a complex hybrid event that brought together members across 7 locations and demonstrated what's possible when technology and thoughtful planning come together. So my name is Richard Macbeth. I'm Client Relationship Manager here at Lumi, and I'm delighted to be joined by Pete Fowler, our Chief Operating Officer, and also Simon Plunkett, who's Deputy Society Secretary from our co-op. So Pete, perhaps I can hand over to you first to introduce yourself.
Thanks so much, Richard, and really appreciate it, and thank you for all of you for attending today. So I think, as Richard said, my name is Pete Fowler. I am the COO of Lumi Global. For those of you that do know Lumi Global, you'll know this, but just to give a short introduction to Lumi Global. So we are an organization that's well over 30 years old now, and we really do support shareholder meetings, and that's shareholder meetings relating to AGMs. And then from there, we extend our services into investor relations events, association conferences, elections, and assemblies. So Lumi Global delivers secure voting platforms, real-time engagement, and trusted governance technology. And that's whether that may be hybrid, whether that be traditionally in the room, whether that be online. Of course, we're focusing a little bit on the hybrid element today with Simon today from our co-op. But yes, it's great to be here.
Thank you very much, Pete. Simon, thank you so much for joining us today and for lending us your time. We'd love to hear about your role and your experience at our co-op, so I'll hand over to yourself for a quick introduction as well.
Yeah, thanks so much, Richard, and thank you for having me. So my name's Simon. I'm a Deputy Secretary at our co-op. For background, our co-op is the largest independent cooperative society in the UK, and we were formed on the 26th of January when Central Co-op and Mid-Counties cooperatives came together. We previously, Central had brought Chelmsford Cooperative in, so we are now a cooperative comprising 1 million members. And my core responsibilities are to support the board and to support our annual and interim meetings. So this year, we'll come on to it shortly, a big challenge with first annual meeting for a new society, bringing together 3 different organisations.
Thank you so much. So before we get into today's discussion, just a couple of typical housekeeping items. This session is being recorded and the link will be shared with you afterwards. We're always keen for people to engage at these sessions, so please do participate in the discussion today by submitting your questions or comments via the messaging tab on the platform. And finally, we will be concluding today's webinar with a very short survey. We kindly request that you fill out the survey as it will help us plan future webinars and ensure that we always deliver high quality content relevant to your needs. And the link to that survey will appear in a survey tab on the left-hand panel of the platform towards the end of the meeting. So yeah, just to start off the discussion, I'll hand over to Pete to talk about the member engagement challenge.
Thanks so much, Richard. Yeah, exactly that. So talking about the member engagement challenge, I think it's really kind of setting the scene here before we delve into sort of the details of the meeting. And I think, one question, Simon, from your perspective, one of the challenges many membership organizations are facing is that despite having more ways than ever to communicate with your members, meaningful participation can still be quite difficult to achieve. So I was just wondering, how have you seen member expectations and behaviours change, and what does that mean for the way organisations need to sort of engage with their members?
Yeah, thanks, Pete. I think the first challenge or opportunity that I would identify, I've been looking at annual meetings for nearly 20 years now, is that the multi-channel approach that we offer enables members with very different expectations to engage and join in the meeting. So your traditional members who wish to turn up to an in-person meeting, hear presentations and put their questions, at the one end of the very actively engaged spectrum, to those members who may wish to join online and simply listen, or members who might actually just want to rewatch it as a download after the meeting. So there's a very broad spectrum of engagement and expectation, all of which needs to be managed and all of which is valid. So as a cooperative society or a member-owned organisation, you're trying to hit a sweet spot where you're offering appropriate levels of engagement with very differing expectations of what active participation means. And I think that is the biggest challenge that we are facing as, and in a sense, the technology almost becomes the challenge because the technology enables so many different methods of engagement. So I think at the moment it's that balance between highly active in the room participation versus very low level activity online, and how you try to meet all of those expectations for your meeting.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And I think it's definitely a challenge. And I guess one challenge would be is that you've got to try and make sure that it's fair across all different methods of attendance. So make sure that you're not disenfranchising one person versus the other, whether they'll be in the room, whether they'll be online. I'm sure that that's something that you face as well, or consider.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we find particularly is that when you get to the Q&A element of the meeting, which is for many members the most important part of the meeting, where the board and the executive are held to account, unless you're prepared to run an extremely long meeting, then you may never match that expectation of those active members in terms of wanting to put all of their questions to a panel. Now, I know that in other organisations, there may be lower levels of engagement and there aren't so many questions driven from members in that Q&A. But for co-op societies, in my experience, the challenge is that there is a greater number of members wishing to ask questions than time available to respond to those questions. So we then have to think about, well, what do we do with those questions after the meeting that we didn't answer? How do we give those members a sense of engagement and reward them for their participation if during the meeting they felt like they weren't able to have their voice heard?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, here's a good question, actually, is in the sense of, other than yourself, when you look at organizations that are successfully engaging their members, what do you think, what do you understand that they're doing different to others? Is there benchmarks that you're looking for to try and achieve? Is there a standout? I'm not suggesting names here, but I'm suggesting ways in which others engage their members. Is there something that you aspire to be doing, or do you feel like you're getting close to that?
Yeah, I think it's about treating the annual meeting as a engagement activity that probably lasts for 6 months rather
Yeah,
than 2 hours.
yeah.
So what are you providing to members ahead of the meeting? Are you providing relevant information about your business through the annual report, video, engaging activity? Are you trying to facilitate debates and conversations before your meeting? Have you prepared all the relevant information on your website? During the meeting, have you allocated enough time for Q&A and engagement? Have you thought about the different channels which you are offering? And then how much after the meeting are you committed to actually going back and responding to those questions from members, providing summaries of the event, clips of video, additional information? And then throughout the year, is there that cadence where we're talking about what members shared at meetings and what we're doing about it? So I think if I'm looking, I couldn't identify a particular organisation that I'm looking to as a benchmark. But I would certainly say some of the largest mutuals and co-ops who don't see their AGM as a piece of regulatory governance, but see it as a all year round opportunity to engage their members, is where a successful business needs to be.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think I can draw upon some of the corporate examples and listed examples that I've seen across the world. Some in the UK as well, where I do see that they are really creating that shareholder engagement event maybe prior to the annual meeting itself. That gives the capacity and the ability to ask those those questions and get those points across, perhaps away from the formal part of the AGM, but it does all blend together, as you say. It's a cycle, isn't it? It's not just a one meeting only event, and I think that's where you've clearly been successful and are being successful, and I think it's where other organizations are actually aspiring to do that as well. It's kind of like an investor relations piece, isn't it? It's kind of like extending the annual general meeting into much more of an opportunity to ask questions. So, yeah, it's a great point.
I think the final point I'd make on that as well is that the challenge has to be that if you are willing to create those opportunities and to hear member feedback and to have the board has to be prepared to act on that, and if not, to actually change policy or approach to explain to members why it's chosen not to based on such strong member feedback. So I suppose it's no good having the pretense of engagement if there is no output or outcome from the board or executive for creating it in the first place.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, agreed. I feel like you may have addressed a little bit of this question, but I'll ask this question anyway because we can maybe extend it slightly further. But as organisations are looking to make meetings more accessible, and many have adopted that hybrid format. In your experience, what really separates that successful hybrid meeting from one that simply feels like a live stream or in-person event? I said, I feel like you have addressed that a little bit, but I don't know if there's anything more to expand there.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we talked about throughout the creation of the presentations and the video is that you can't in a hybrid have a in room first principle.
Yeah.
You've got to think with everything that you're presenting. What does this look like if I'm sat at home watching it while I'm having my tea with the kids? What does it look like if I'm watching this on the train on an iPhone? So I think there's a natural inclination to still go for the almost physical meeting first, and then there'll also be a stream with the camera. So we did invest heavily in our AV support.
Yeah.
So there were different, if you like, different views and different videos and different perspectives to the online viewer. I think when talking about hybrid as well, we had the added complexity of having the linked physical venues. And I think there's still more work for us to do in making sure that balance feels appropriate. Because I think if you're in a local venue watching a broadcast, you may feel, well, I may as well have been online because it feels a bit more like a watch party from a venue rather than actually having equal footing with that broadcast venue. So I do think the added complexity of trying to link up multiple physical venues is almost more complicated than adding the online element to one physical meeting. And I don't think we've got that right just yet.
Okay. Yeah, I completely agree, and I think there's more work to be done there just generally, I think, and how technology can support and how we can really support that experience for the members themselves. One question actually that just came to my mind was a little bit around the preparation for your board for such a meeting.
Yes.
It's a big challenge. I mean, you've added an even greater challenge by having 7 sites plus the online attendance. How did you feel, that preparation for your board, and how could you support them, and any learnings from that?
Yeah, I think the first thing I'd say is we started engagement with our board very early in January. We pitched the proposal to them and the format and the ambition, and we wanted them to be clear around the complexity of it if they went for it. They were keen to do it, new society, lots of different trading venues, different cultures and styles of meeting. So they were very much with us from the outset on the journey in January. What we also tried to do is ensure that board directors had ownership locally. So if we take the in-person meetings, whilst the join up into the broadcast meeting may not have always been as smooth or as perfect as we may be able to get to in 2 or 3 years, there was local board ownership. So we would say to board members, well, you're not at the broadcast meeting, but there are 2 board directors at every meeting. So you've got a real responsibility in the room to own that meeting and to be that single point of accountability. So the board took quite a lot of local ownership rather than having 12 board directors sat on a stage within the broadcast meeting. And we also have board directors who are situated online so that they could listen and feed and engage with those members. And I think the other practical point I would add is that we clearly went through a number of rehearsal opportunities with the board to get them comfortable with the practical elements of the meeting before we added on the content.
Yeah, exactly that. And I think, as you say, the preparation's key with it. There's no doubt, for the many years that we've been doing this, and the support that we provided organizations. I hope that we, as a provider to you, also came with a lot of advice and support and consultancy kind of elements, because we learn an awful lot around the world of all of these experiences that occur. So I think, trusting in that provider and the AV team as well, I'm sure is of great assistance to you in that moment.
Yeah, I think where I found Lumi really helpful in that regard was we were having those weekly meetings with the team who are going to be physically on site at the events. As the secretary at the moment of the meeting, I was talking through the really practical points around, well, how will voting work? How will questions work? And we're able to have multiple run-throughs and demos of exactly how that would look for me, stood on the stage trying to facilitate that meeting, so that when I was then briefing the board, I felt comfortable that Lumi had provided me with a technical grounding of how the meeting was going to run, because that's the stuff the board aren't really interested in until it doesn't work and it
Yeah.
all falls to pieces, and then they're very interested in it. So I
Yeah.
think I did feel supported with how long do you need to wait between voting resolutions? How's a Q&A going to work? How am I going to see the questions? Have I got visibility of an iPad on the lectern? All of those practical questions for the secretaries facilitating that meeting. So
Yeah.
you can ask the board questions, and you can ensure the board know that the tech isn't going to go down because we've thought about this and we've practiced it.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And I think, as you say, the art of preparation is absolutely key. And I think it's also, for us, and what I always say to potential customers is, having a provider that's thinking about what could happen in 2-3 stages, always thinking ahead of what could possibly happen next, and anticipating things as well based on experience. That's key in a meeting format quite like this. One last question I have, actually, and it's an interesting question around a lot that's going on in different markets around the world. This is very different as far as legislation. What's your thoughts on virtual meeting? A virtual only meeting, and is that ever a thought that you made around this particular meeting? Was that ever a consideration, just virtual only? Because I know it certainly comes with its great benefits. It certainly comes with, people do have expectation or feelings about this type of meeting and this type of format that it's not appropriate. And I just, keen to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah. I think a virtual meeting is as appropriate and worthy as a in-person meeting, but I can never see our society opting for one at the expense of the other. So I think they both have their worthy place in governance. For a cooperative society, we have a tradition of active member engagement. We have members who are willing at their own expense to attend our physical meetings. And to hold the board to account. And we believe that's a core right of a member. And I think we will remain committed to offering that in-person meeting. But it may be that as time evolves, that actually the focus and the energy and the resource is on the online meeting, because that's where the bulk of our members are in terms of total number of members who are wishing to engage. And it's almost the digital meeting first, supported with a small in-person meeting. But I can see why a virtual meeting only doesn't offer as much active engagement to those who are willing to give up their time to attend an in-person meeting.
Yeah.
So for me, the two should come together, and the balance that you place on resource and budget depends on the organization's needs, but I don't see it as a either or.
Yeah.
And I think the technology and the systems we're talking about enable the two to work together.
Exactly that. And I completely agree. I think, as you quite rightly highlight, I think it's all about knowing your members, and it's knowing your audience and knowing your shareholders in a corporate listed event. It's, what do they want, and what is the right thing for them and the organization to make sure that engagement is true to its nature. And I think that is also key as well, is addressing all of the points and questions that come up in those types of meetings, is making sure that it's very transparent and it's very clear, and that would lead to a successful meeting. But certainly one thing I'm very passionate of is that, I think it's the choice of the organization based on obviously the right thing to do for their members and shareholders. But I do think, and I will also be, obviously work for Lumi, and I'm very passionate around technology, but I also do think one of the biggest things to avoid is an in-person meeting only. For me, that
Agreed.
is as equally as bad as somebody's opinion on virtual only. It's very much as you say, it's a lot of cost, a lot of expense, and a lot of time to get to that meeting at 11 o'clock in a particular venue. That's very challenging for
Yeah.
many people. So the introduction of technology in a hybrid format, just like you did for your meeting, which was highly successful, certainly for me fits the bill, and
It's
that should be
huge.
the norm.
Yeah, and if we just think about our numbers, we're typically seeing engagement attendance levels of 1,500 at a meeting.
Yeah,
Of that 1,500, two-thirds to three-quarters are online. So that
yeah,
gives you a
amazing.
sense of very high numbers, really, for a cooperative society. But the bulk is online, so that's where our focus of engagement should be. And I think the other thing to add is that we were a regional cooperative organisation. We're now a very large co-op. For organisations and PLCs which become even larger and international, I think the digital meeting becomes even more worthy and even more attractive. So I think the in-person meeting for local or small-scale organisations has greater value, but as an organisation becomes bigger, it has to move towards technology.
Yeah, completely agree. Thank you for that. So perhaps I'll hand back to Richard to sort of introduce our next section, which is probably going a little bit more in depth into your actual meeting and how things were
Yeah.
run.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, we've already, I think, kind of started down that avenue anyway,
Yeah.
sort of in talking about it. But so, the next section of the webinar is just sort of looking more at the specifics of our co-op's recent annual members meeting, the context behind it, how it was planned, which we've already sort of spoken about, and how you guys delivered a meaningful member experience at scale. So, just to sort of comment on the technical perspective, obviously a very complex meeting with Lumi's registration and voting technology provided across multiple sites around the UK and to the online audience, as we've heard, along with question functionalities for all those involved, which was managed by a centrally located Q&A moderator team from our co-op using Lumi's moderator dashboard. So just as a bit of background sort of context to the meeting, over to you, Pete, to kind of delve into that further, I guess.
Yeah, and as you say, I think we've started touching on this, but clearly the point of this meeting was to create an experience where every member feels able to be able to participate and have their voice heard. And that was obviously put to a real test in your scenario with the multiple sites and the online capacity. Could you expand and sort of set the scene for us on what the challenge, what was the challenge that you were trying to solve as our
Yeah.
co-op?
So I think if we go back to the outset, our co-op was formed from three cooperatives. So if we roll back 12 months to May 2025, then all these different co-ops would have had their own annual meetings using different styles, different variations in terms of mixture of in-person and online, length of meeting. So what we were trying to achieve was first meeting of a new society that blended the best parts of the meetings that had been held by the different societies. And this ranged from meetings that lasted all day on a Saturday to less than an hour online. So not only have you got the sort of engagement channel perspective, you've also got the length of time and the content challenges. Where we wanted to land was that any member could join the meeting online or at 7 UK-wide venues, which were dispersed across our training area. There was a relatively good geographic spread. And if they joined at 7 o'clock for the start of the meeting, they'd be able to hear the same presentations from the board of directors, the president, and the CEO. So there'd be an element of consistency around the national message that we were providing to members. So it wasn't just around members being able to engage, it was about our board being able to provide a single message to members in a range of different organizations, different areas, to have some consistency around our key messaging. That was really important for our CEO and for our board. What we also built into the meeting, though, was the recognition that at some point during the agenda, we'd want to break that meeting out into a more regional, local element. So the first half of the meeting was broadly around our strategic business priorities, commercial performance, and our plans for the future as a new society. We then, at the halfway stage, broke that meeting into 7 pieces, and then each local venue had its own meeting almost, which was a part 2, where we talked more about some of the local and regional membership activity that's going on in our business and hosted a further Q&A. So if you think about it, you had one single Q&A and then 7 additional Q&As. And again, that provided additional touch points for members to engage with the directors, because the directors had been distributed across those 7 meetings. So it gave us 7 times as many opportunities for members to hold the board to account.
I mean, it's fascinating. It was clearly such a challenge for you to be able to try and achieve. And I think it's clear to, based on the success of the meeting, it certainly was achieved in that moment. When you started planning your meeting, what were the priorities, and what were you looking for in a solution to help you deliver that? Because I guess you're thinking about compliance of registration and everything, the legalities of the meeting, I think is probably up there, I'm sure. And of course, we've touched on engagement a lot, but was there any, as I said, were there any main priorities that you're looking for?
Yeah, we had some 3 or 4 core meeting principles, and you're right, Pete. The compliance and the regulation does come first. So the meeting had to satisfy our rule book. So I suppose that the top priorities in there were that all eligible members would need to be able to register, attend, and vote at the meeting, however they chose to join us. So Lumi was an obvious technology solution there, given your opportunity, your experience of being able to offer that registration and voting journey through multiple channels. All members needed to be able to ask questions, and all members needed to be able to hear the what we call our key strategic and commercial updates from our board and CEO through those different channels. So, if you like, there are guiding principles. I think the other one that we added to that was that there should be reasonable time allocated for members to ask their questions, both in a formal broadcast session and in a local session. So, if you like, there are governing principles, and I suppose finally there were certain items of age and business which needed to be taken at the meeting. So, some of the standard resolutions around rule of accounts, re-election of directors, auditors, and so on and so forth. So we had to design a system that enabled us to bring all of those votes together on the evening. And it was really important to us that those votes could be confirmed members on the evening as well. So one of the challenges we put to Lumi was this needs to be real time. We can't vote on the Wednesday and see results on the Monday. We need to see some instant outcomes of the voting so that members feel that their input has driven the outcomes on the night, rather than, I think in the past we've taken the vote on the evening and then we produced the result the next day. So we were looking for something that was faster and something that was quicker.
Yeah. I mean, one area that actually, so there was an event that I was at recently in Vancouver for a credit union member meeting, and it was an event that was relatively similar, but not as complex as your one for sure, as far as the multiple sites. But it was a central site location, and then with an online attendance. I think they would have probably had around 500 or so in the room. And then around 1,500 online throughout mostly Vancouver area and in Canada, the western side of Canada. One thing that they did slightly differently, and I'm just curious about the use of technology and how things, because we talked about the in-room participation for your members was actually to use an electronic voting device, which comes with some great advantages. But actually, one thing that they did was to have BYOD, so bring your own device. That ability for you to come in as a member, scan a QR code that's obviously that's your QR code that's designated to you, and that logs you straight into an online role on your own mobile device. Is that something that you see as a potential opportunity for the future, maybe combining that with electronic voting devices? I just like to think about how technology can evolve further to sort of support meetings.
Yeah, I think so. I think in my head, it would need to be very simple. It would need to be a QR code, as you set out, that takes you directly to a voting page, and the instructions are relatively simple to then be able to cast your vote or submit a question from your device.
Yeah.
I think there's always a concern that people will say, well, my device may not work, or I'm not tech savvy. But then my understanding was people were able to use the voting devices provided to them by Lumi in the room as well. But I think that will be a good place to get to, and it may also take that voting remotely could be potentially more simplified. through the use of their own devices.
Yeah, exactly. I think maybe it's a combination of everything, isn't it? It's making sure, I mean, compliance is the most important thing, as you say, and the legality of the meeting. So making sure that everybody has the ability to vote and participate. So as you say, if a phone device is not compatible for whatever reason, which is very unusual, or that's a very low battery, you never know the status of anybody's one device, or connectivity is very low, then I think the opportunity to offer something else is the most important thing. And I think that's certainly where we're looking to when we are deploying our technology and our platform, is making sure it's the user journey is very clear and concise and easy, but we are always accessible to everyone. That's certainly key.
I
There's
think
oh,
I
sorry.
just got on that because
Yeah.
people may also feel that if they're voting on their own device, there's more, when I say sort of ownership of their vote, I think there's always a perception if you're using someone else's technology that the vote is being cast on someone else's systems. So
Interesting.
therefore, okay, so is there a report that's produced afterwards, and that report goes back to the business of. So I think they might feel that that ownership of the vote and separating it by being on their own device might give them some further reassurance that they're not using the technology of a third party to vote, and reports are then generated after the meeting and so on and so forth. So I can
That's
see the
yeah.
advantage of it being owned on your device and almost disappearing after the meeting because you've had the QR code for a temporary amount of time.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective, actually, and that's thank you for that. One thing that was amazing, and I think was, absolutely fascinating, and on reflection of the meeting, was the level of engagement. So you clearly, obviously, struck the right chord in the sense of providing the right technology and the right ability to participate. And were you surprised by that? Were you surprised by that level of engagement? And do you think, what was it that you thought encouraged members to have a voice and speak and ask questions?
Yeah, we know our members are very active. I think in most cooperative organisations in the UK, there's a history of active membership. We encourage it. We'd hope that bringing together three societies to the very moment we found ourselves in, we did expect there to be lively debate and high engagement, which we had. I also think the platform which Lumen provided was enabling and was simple and straightforward to use. So we actually found ourselves in situations I've alluded to earlier where we had too many questions to answer. We had too many comments to try and work through. So when we maybe come into this, one of the challenges we now have is, well, how do we begin to gather up that information and rank it or prioritize it or theme it? Because the engagement levels were so high that we almost had too much with the time permitted to work through all of the things that members wanted us to talk about and ask questions around.
Yeah, it's a challenge we see, a lot of association meetings and membership meetings, is that level of engagement. I think, as you say, and you touched on earlier, this isn't just a one-time event only where it stops the minute the meeting ends. It is an ability for you to continually engage with those members that did ask questions that perhaps you couldn't get round to. And I think the ability to moderate successfully, to group successfully, is where we see meetings being successfully delivered. And there's an art to that, and that's, of course, where a lot of preparation goes into that to make sure that that's thought about and that's prepared. But as you say, you now have content that your members have provided you that you can now use, can't you? And you can get back to your members post the event if there was not an opportunity to do so at the meeting time. And that's something that would have just been lost if you would have only had one microphone stand in one meeting room, and members couldn't speak because the meeting ended. So it's certainly the value of the data that you receive, I think, is impressive when it comes to a hybrid meeting.
Yeah, I agree with that. The download report we've had from yourselves is extremely useful. It's data that's there forever. It can be relatively easily grouped into categories and themes. We even ran it through some AI. It produced a report for us to tell us what were the main themes, what were the key words, all of that useful information that AI can provide you with that sort of insight and breakdown. And I think what that's beginning to lead us towards is are there ways on the night or live in the meeting to rank by theme using data which potentially yourselves could provide. So if the facilitator on the stage, there's clarity in terms of dashboard or data or visuals, that the most important theme to members tonight is sustainability, or it happens to be integration or colleague pay, whatever it might be. So the data is able to be aggregated in some way to be able to talk about themes, rather than we've received a question from a member online or member in person. The facilitator's got clarity on what the real themes of the meeting are, rather than the granular questions.
Yeah. As we're drawing slightly to a close towards the webinar, to start mentioning AI is dangerous. we could have a whole session on AI, but I think it's it's such a, what I will say about AI from a Lumi perspective, it's certainly as you can only imagine, a huge area that we're looking at. But it's an area that's to deploy something like that themes or provides you data. You've got to be very careful deploying something like that when it comes to AI, to make sure that it is absolutely accurate. So I think for us, it's certainly an area that we're excited about, what we could provide you and our customers in the future around Q&A and things like that.
So perhaps being able to say, we know the main subject tonight was, and the data supports this, can sometimes navigate you through 100 questions on the same theme.
Exactly that, and making sure that that's completely accurate is key for us. So I think probably one last question for me, and I think that we'll then turn to Richard for some questions that have come in, hopefully. But just is one of those classic ones. Looking back at your meeting, and you've touched on a few things here, so apologies, I'm probably making you try and think of other things, but by all means, you can re-emphasize some of the things that you said already. But what did surprise you? What advice would you give other membership organizations who are considering a very similar approach in delivering a hybrid meeting?
That's a really good question. I think we focused a lot of our rehearsal time on speeches, making sure the executive and the board were comfortable with how the meeting would run from a broadcast perspective. I don't think we spent enough time thinking about how we'd manage the questions that we received through the Lumi platform. So my advice on what I will be doing for a future meeting is running a rehearsal that isn't around speeches and broadcasts and actual Q&A from the stage, but is a rehearsal of the systems and the technology, with a number of colleague volunteers from the business submitting as many questions as possible and comments on as many different themes as possible at pace across different venues, different devices, different channels, so that the key roles of that facilitator and the moderator and the Lumi team on that platform, how do they manage that volume of data and questions in the moment live, because there isn't 2 days to look at this and decide what you want to put through, and then really getting a bit slicker on how the moderator puts the questions to facilitate based on the volume of data received. I think we need to get a bit better at that, not actually spend. I think the natural inclination is to spend rehearsal time on board directors and chairpersons' speeches and doing Q&A, whereas you always need more rehearsal on the systems.
Yeah, that's such great advice, and I'm sure everybody that's attending today and listening to this on repeat would really value that feedback and advice. And as I said, I think it comes down to that preparation piece for sure, and Lumi being able to support you in the preparation of that meeting. But it's certainly, as I said, really good advice. So look, Simon, thank you for your insights, and thank you for all of the answers that you provided so far. As I said, I think we've got a couple of questions that may well have come in, but before we do move to those questions from you, the audience, can I just remind you to please complete that survey link? It's invaluable for us to get this data to make sure that we are delivering really good webinar meetings. So please do that. It's loaded on the platform, so just do click on that link and participate there. Over to you, Richard.
Thanks, Pete. So yeah, we have had a couple of questions that have come in, conscious of time, obviously, but hopefully we can go through some of them with you, Simon. So the first question we've got is, how else do you think technology could be used to further increase member participation at members' meetings in your society? And we've kind of already touched on that, I suppose, in some of the discussions we've had, but is there sort of anything else that can be added to that?
Yeah, I think there's one around the question of the themes, which I'll come back to, and then there's one around, I think, integration of technology into our technology. So I think Pete touched on it about the use of own device, but we have a membership app. Within our membership app, we have a participation section. I would like to see in the future how our technology could be joined to the Lumi technology. So I go in to participate, and I can directly feed into the meeting. So I can go into my app and I can use the app in order to join the meeting, vote in the meeting, hear the meeting, and see all of the materials. I think there's something around integration of platforms between the Lumi voting app on the night, the Lumi system, and the co-op app that exists. So we don't have to send members links. We don't have to send them any registration information. They just open their phone, they click on the app, and off they go. So that's about ease of accessibility. I think the other area that I'm really interested in with technology is the idea of up-ranking of themes and ideas. So if we want to see democracy truly in action in the meeting, if members like a question, can they like it? Can it move nearer the top of the list that the moderator and the facilitator are seeing? So that when the question gets to the facilitator knows that this is the most popular question in the meeting, or 200 people have asked this question. Now, clearly, that question may be the question that is the last question you want to ask the board, but nonetheless, the facilitator's got that data-driven knowledge that this is the killer question that members want to ask tonight, rather than questions that can feel quite operational or peripheral, but they happen to be the one that you visually see first.
Perfect. I think that makes total sense. Second question we've had, given the complexity of the voting across 7 meetings and online, are there any learnings you can share which you'll be taking into future meetings?
That's a really good question, because voting is definitely complex and is often the hardest part of the meeting. I think there is always I think one thing I identify with the voting is that it can feel very formal, and the time taken to work through the votes and to produce the result, which across 7 meetings was seconds, can feel like minutes. So I think there's something about managing the members in that room to understand that the voting will take us 1 to 2 minutes, and we ask members to vote carefully and to vote slowly, and to perhaps add some additional visuals to that voting process, so that members just understand that the minute they click their vote, it's not completely finished. I think as well, there's something around the display of the results once the votes have been cast, and the facilitator having that forward view of the votes. So if you're going to announce the votes immediately after each vote or as soon as voting finishes, it's thinking about how the facilitator of that vote can build in time to review it and consider how they want to then take the meeting. So if we give an example of where we tried to be organised, we'd had to come up with a voters passed, voters not passed verbal update for each of the resolutions, because you're seeing it in the live. So I think it's being prepared for votes going either way if you're going to review them in the live.
Interesting, very interesting. Thank you so much for that. And we have had some other questions through, but unfortunately, that is all we have sort of time for today. If your question has not been answered today, we'll ensure that you receive a response by email once the webinar is completed. So, Simon, thank you so much for sharing your experience and insights with today. It's been really, really interesting. I think your story has provided a really practical example of how organisations can rethink member participation while ensuring that governance, accessibility, and the member experience remain really at the heart of the meeting. So before we close, I'd really appreciate it if you could take a moment to complete that survey, which Pete's just mentioned again, that's available within the platform in the survey tab, as your feedback continues to help us sort of shaping future conversations. And for anyone who would like to revisit the discussion or share it with colleagues, like I mentioned at the start of the webinar, we'll be sending a recording of today's discussion over the next few days. But just finally remains me to say thank you so much again to Simon and to Pete for leading today's discussion, and to, more importantly, for all of you for joining us and participating. We really appreciate your time. We hope you found that the session was valuable, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.